In this video, we're going to take a deeper look into the major arcana, and I've got lots of exciting revelations to talk about through my own understanding of the major arcana through my 15 years of professional experience as a tarot reader. Let's get into the video and let's have fun with it. So hopefully you've already watched the Fool's Journey video and you understand that the major arcana is a process of learning about your soul and the choices that we face as souls, having this human existence, this materialized existence on earth. So now that we've grasped that, I'd just like to first recap what the major arcana is. The major arcana are half of the tarot, and the tarot is made up of 76 cards, 54 of which are minor arcana, which relate to the everyday matters in life and the everyday experience that we have, and the major arcana, which are 22 cards relating to the evolution of our soul through materialized existence. In other words, how our soul functions in life and the things that we experience on a spiritual and deeper level. The major arcana is split into 5 sections. We have the Fool and the Magician 1 and 0, representing for the divine force and the cyclical nature of completion. So these are both the passive and active elements within the universe, the protons and neutrons, the dualities of male and female, and the dualities of manifest and complete. And they really stand alone. So we'll talk about them right at the end. But for now, we're going to take a really deeper look at the other 4 sections of the major arcana. And you might ask why in these videos I'm not teaching the meanings of individual cards, and I'm not teaching you, say, how to be psychic or how to use your intuition. And that's because in order for you to tap into your psychic ability and your intuition, you have to be confident with the language that you're using. It's the difference between trying to use Google Translate or a foreign language dictionary to try and communicate with someone, and having a really basic framework of the language and being able to actually ask someone how much something costs, or being able to order a coffee. The energy feels very different. And so my videos and my teaching methods are always to aim to give you the academic and the historical framework, as well as the creative and artistic framework, to understand these things, these universal truths, with a foundation that helps you to feel raised and helps you to feel confident, so then you can make your own judgments. Because otherwise all I'm doing is spoon feeding you information you can get free off the internet, and I'm also imposing my view of what the cards mean upon you, and I'm imposing my will upon you, which is not a habitable space for you to really elicit your own psychic ability. I had to learn the tarot on my own. We didn't have the internet when I was learning the tarot, and there wasn't really much availability for me to learn this from anybody else. And so through my experience, I have had to put this information together, and I'm giving you the tools to do that for yourself too. So as I mentioned, there is 4 sections to the main body of the tarot when we exclude the Fool and the Magician, and I've already spoken about them on parts of this course. But for this journey, what we're looking at is set 1 is cards 2 to 6. So that's the High Priestess, the Empress, the Emperor, the Hierophant, and the Lovers. And if you notice, when you're looking at these cards, 4 of these cards are people who are sat down. They're physical people. And the last 2 of these cards, the Hierophant and the Lover, also include 2 other people. Now we'll talk about that in a moment, but it's important to notice the imagery within these cards. And what we are looking at with these first 5 cards is we are looking at how to understand and how to source information about spiritual process. So if you imagine that you are the fool on your quest, you are the student, the pupil on this course, and you are looking at, well, how are you going to teach me? How am I going to source this information? I want to know something. I have a question about the universe that I need to answer. So who do I go to? And these 5 cards represent the energies, the archetypes that you can go to seek out this information in the correct stages. So when we're looking at the journey of the major arcana from card 1 to card 21, what we're viewing is a lesson about the correct order in which to do things. So the first 5 cards represent knowledge and wisdom, dogma and tradition, and where to seek that wisdom. So with the High Priestess, what we see is she is the record keeper. She's the holder of esoteric knowledge, of hidden knowledge. And you can find that through the occult. You can find that through spirituality. You don't need religion to find that. In fact, you can't have religion, because religion is about order and tradition and routine, and spirituality is about the freedom to think, to absorb, and to seek information. And so with the High Priestess, that's the lesson that we have to begin with. We have to find our own spirituality. We have to find our own duality. And then the Empress teaches empathy. She teaches reserve. She teaches restraint. She teaches us to calm the energy of suddenly having a spiritual download. She teaches us to ground ourselves. The Emperor teaches discernment and teaches responsibility. So now we have, say, our Akashic records downloaded from the High Priestess. The Empress helps us to ground that energy and have empathy for ourselves and others on this path. And the Empress says, I have to take responsibility now to do something with it. And so the Emperor goes to the Hierophant, who's the priest, and says, I need you to formalize this practice for me, and I need to join some sort of order in order to do that. Because without structure, this is where the aspect of religion might come in, or like spiritual process might come in. What you're doing is spiritual bypassing. So you go in, if you jump from the High Priestess to the Lovers, you've missed 3 steps, which means you're spiritual bypassing. So if you do from the High Priestess to the Hierophant, those 4 steps, and then get to the Lovers, what you find that is the Lovers is a spiritual calling. So you now know which avenue of formal spiritualized practice you want to go down. Do you want to be a Christian? Do you want to be a Thelemite? Do you want to be a yogi? What practice of spirituality are you going to then pull the information that you got from the High Priestess and apply it into practice? Now that you have made the right choice and taken this correct steps, you are now able to enter card 7, which is the Chariot. And when we look at section 2, we go from the Chariot to Justice, card 11. And we see that in this section, this is about attaining one's will and process and understanding the rhythms and the flows of mastering one's ego and mastering one's will. So we see this through the Chariot. The Chariot asks us to observe the mind, body and soul, and make sure you are fully in alignment before you move forward. If you are out of alignment, you will find that when we get to card 8, the Strength card, and what we have is either repressed anger or expressed anger, or a disillusionment and a will and a lack of will to succeed in the difficulty of this spiritual journey. So what we must do is, after having made the right choices with the Lovers, if we have not allowed ourselves to be spiritually bypassed, and if we have done the correct steps in the first section, then we will be in alignment with our true will. And our true will then moves on to card 8 and allows us to prise open the mouth of the lion. And this is really a message about the purity of one's desire. If your desire is pure and your quest is pure, and what you seek is enlightenment, and this is represented in the woman's white dress in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and the redness of the lion, or we may even call it a demon, prizing open that mouth is a task of purity. So the quest is pure. The quest is not about attaining wealth or success or dominance over others, as with the Devil card. The quest is about the humble nature of attaining spiritual completion, spiritual enlightenment alone. And this is where we move on to the Hermit card. So the Hermit card, in medieval times, the Hermit represented someone who had actively pursued a solitary life in order to process spiritual wisdom. And often hermits became revered and known as priests or holy people. And we still have people like that in, say, India today. And so because your soul is pure with the Strength card, and you've proven that purity by opening the mouth of the beast, you are then able to understand that this journey must be undertaken alone. And then we move on to card 10, the Wheel of Fortune. And the Wheel of Fortune represents the true nature of fate. So we have free will on this journey. The Fool is a free man. He is the everyman, and he is able to walk this journey freely, but he is still governed by universal law. And say if we take astrology, universal law is energy which imprints and restricts us, just as gravity restricts us to this earth. And so in order to understand that this is a solo journey, we also have to understand that we are never truly alone, and that everything that we do is imprinted upon us by universal law. To understand that anything given, anything in that fate has chosen to given, is a state of illusion, because it can be taken away. So if we look at material wealth, if we have, say, won the lottery and we feel like this is a very fated thing, we can also understand that we can lose our money, we can spend our money, and we can be left again with nothing. Because the journey of the Fool is not one about what they can gain through the fates. This is a personal journey of the soul, and the soul is eternal and can never be added or subtracted to. It can only be realized, and this is why the Wheel of Fortune is so important within the tarot. But if we apply some of these cards to tarot reading, that what we see with the energy is, if we say have the Lovers card, well, in a reading it could represent an opportunity for love, but then you have to make the consideration, is this love a love with foundation and responsibility and due diligence, or is this love frivolous, and am I spiritually bypassing something I don't want to address? For example, if you ignored the red flags and went with the Lovers anyway, that would be spiritually bypassing the 3 steps of the Empress, the Hierophant, the Emperor and the Hierophant, who help you to ground and stabilize that love into something meaningful. After we've understood the energy of card 10, the Wheel of Fortune, we then move on to Justice. And Justice is about balancing those scales. So the Wheel of Fortune is an ever-turning wheel of rising up and then losing what you have. So it's gambling, it's a lottery. Whereas Justice brings you out of that energy, and it says, weigh up the importance of what you have. Weigh up the importance of what you seek. Is it more important for you to have everything given to you by fate and be right at the top of that wheel? Or is it more important that you get yourself off the wheel and you honor the balance within the universe, and you accept, in many ways, accept your fate, accept that sometimes you're going to be high and sometimes you're going to be low, but the low energy does not detract from your soul. Your soul is effervescent, it's always pure, and it's always lit. And we see that with the Hermit card if we move slightly backwards in that journey. We then have to go through the process of ego death. Ego death, you're here, you're into the occult, you're into mysticism, you're into spirituality. You understand that in order for us to attain enlightenment, in order for us to seek the answers and wisdom from the universe and from ourselves, from our DNA and from our soul, we have to get control of our ego. And so the next 5 cards, card 12 to card 16, are about the ego death, and I will explain that now. So who is the Hangman? So the Hangman is card 12, and there is a lot of debate about the Hangman, and just like the Wheel of Fortune, the Hangman is very complex. So we recognize that the Hangman is hanging upside down by his ankle, and this is in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, this visual depiction of the Hangman. And the Hangman represents willing spiritual ordeal. If you think that anything worth doing takes effort, what we have here is we have a link to the idea of the holy man, to someone who is willing to sacrifice his personal comfort. Now, this was a really hot idea in the medieval times, and there was a lot of really fired up people talking about self-flagellation and depriving oneself of the needs. I mean, it even went as far as people entombing themselves into churches and having very, very restricted movement. People would wear very rough, coarse fabrics so that they itched all the time. And it's very similar to the idea of the Indian magi and the Indian holy men who would put themselves through physical ordeal, through extreme yogic positions, for example, or extreme ways of existing in order to attain spiritual enlightenment, because it knocks you off the mindset of being in the physical reality. So the Hangman is all about the elimination of physical reality, but it has to be an ordeal. You have to make space for it. So another example of that would be when people fast before they do a spiritual initiation. They cleanse, they process, they get themselves in preparation. And what is the preparation? The preparation is for the death of the ego, which leads us to card 13. Now, I'll talk much more about death card in a separate video because it is an amazing card to get into. But essentially, the death of the ego doesn't mean eradicating the ego. We have to have the ego because the ego keeps us safe. That is the function of ego as a human being, and all animals. All animals have an ego. If you've ever watched a cat fall off a table and the way they respond to that, if they've been seen, you know they've got an ego. And the ego keeps us safe. The ego tells us not to do something, not to embarrass ourselves, not to stand out, and it boosts us up when we need to be boosted up and take action. So the idea of death is the process of eliminating what doesn't need to be there within the ego. And then we move on to temperance. Now, after we've had the ordeal of the hangman and eliminating parts of the ego that aren't serving us and transmuting that and taking it forward, we then have to realign our bodies. Our bodies have been through an ordeal. If you've ever done any shadow work, you know how exhausting that process can be. So you have to then rebuild yourself up. But here's where it gets interesting. If you have spiritually bypassed the first few steps, and if you are not in alignment, you're going to be trying temperance. You're going to be trying to do temperance by absorbing energy from outside forces. And what temperance is teaching, if you just look at my hands, is to absorb that energy within yourself. The Holy Spring comes from within. It comes from your soul. It's never external. And so we have true balance. If you think about the original idea for Tesla batteries, that they were ever continuous and ever self-fulfilling and ever self-perpetuating in this kind of motion. So this is really where we then have the ego challenged by the Devil card. And card 15 is about really asserting your will even when others, like society, are imposing their will upon you, which is why in practical readings the Devil card shows up with difficult employers. The Devil card shows up when you've got responsibilities that you don't want to take because your will is being imposed on by other people. If you've learnt the lessons from the first 13 cards and you're using temperance to self-sustain, you know you can dip your toe into that water. If you look at the Rider-Waite-Smith version of temperance, the angel dipping her toe into the water, or his toe into the water, you can see that you no longer need to fit in with society. You no longer need to be governed by another's will. You can move beyond that. And you are not the subservient character sat beneath the devil. Your ego is the subservient character sat beneath the devil, and your will is sat on top. And you are no longer the inverted pentagram because your will is present. Your will takes precedence, and your true will is to seek the spiritual enlightenment that you had the thirst for when you started this quest by observing the magician's illusions and tricks. As we learn to control our will, and we are now sat above our egos, our true self is sat above our egos, we now have to burn down the rituals and traditions that have been imposed upon us, which are suppressing our true will. And to do that can be challenging and scary. It can mean having to destroy a foundation which you believe to be true. And in an esoteric level, this is what the Tower means. The Tower means really destroying everything that you believed, because you can no longer have that perception of reality now that you are in control of your ego and your will. So in the Tower is a complex card because the Tower in mundane predictions means things like hospitals, it means burning, it means like the phoenix, it means like burning things down. And in medieval times, the Tower was a word for hospitals. And if you think about castles, they were fortified military bases. I mean, yes, they were lavish and luxurious and beautiful, but essentially they were ready for sieges at any moment. So they had to be fortified. And so to destroy something which is fortified is very difficult. I mean, in a literal sense, we can see that when we venture out and, you know, walk down to whichever castle is near to us in the UK and Europe, there is many castles still standing from the Middle Ages. And, you know, that is a real physical expression of how tough it is to really break down those institutions and structures and to start and rebuild something new. Now we move on to set 4. So this is from card 17 to card 21. And these are the heavenly bodies. So they are literally the world, judgment, which is the angels, the sun, the moon, and the stars. So these are how we are seen in the greater picture, and this represents enlightenment. This is the final stage of the quest for knowledge that the Fool started at the beginning of his journey. And what we find with the Star card is we are able to start something new, but we start something new not by leading troops into battle, but by replenishing the earth, by replenishing what we have learned, by acknowledging where we are at and giving back. So the star represents an energy where we can start to think about regrowth. We can start to think about pouring energy back in to building the community, building the attainment building the spiritual wisdom that we desired to do. But we do that by purifying the earth, and that is done through giving back. And so interestingly, what we then see in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, this is so beautifully illustrated because we see the star pouring out almost like an ever-flowing energy of water. Of course, the angle that she's pouring the jug at couldn't possibly create so much flow, and it's turning it into a puddle. And we see in the next card, the moon, that the puddle has now turned into an ocean. What does this represent? It represents how once you are in control of your will through the Devil card and you have controlled your ego and mastered the will, that you are now able to ripple out the goodness that you have learned. You are able to put back into the world. You are able to nurture the universe. You are able to resonate at the frequency of the stars. You are tapping into your galactic star energy. And so with the moon card, that ripple has become an ocean. And not only has it become an ocean, but through the moon, it has exposed the darkness at the depth of that ocean. And now the lobster must crawl upwards. It must crawl to view the light. It is no longer afraid of its shadows, as you, or the Fool, is no longer afraid of your shadow self. So the process has been fulfilled, and the nurturing and the purity and the ripple in the universe has now been attained. And now, because we have done our shadow work through the moon, we find connection with others and connection with the universe through the Sun card. The Sun card is about the soul's expression. Now in astrology, the moon represents the subconscious mind, the home, the mother, our dietary needs, our sleep patterns, and this is all private life. This is all about your private life. And the sun represents our soul's expression. The sun represents our conscious mind. The sun represents our career path, our manifested energy, our father, our universal growth. And so this is all about external expression and growth and liberty. And what we find is we have real soulful expression. We are free of these lessons that have tied us down in the previous 5 cards, the Hangman to the Tower, and we are now liberated of that energy because we have fully evolved. This leads us on to Judgment, card 20, which is the answer. All these last 5 cards are about the answer, and you are finally at a state, or the Fool is finally at a state of peace where he is fully in control of his ego, he has mastered his will, and now he can hear what was already there to begin with. At card 2, the High Priestess. Now, have you noticed the numerology within these cards as well? The High Priestess is card 2. Judgment is card 20. We still have 2 2s. And so what we see is that there is no evolution. The answers were there all along. The ordeal was the Fool, that the Fool chose to undertake, was not necessary because the answers already existed. But because he is a physical being on this earth with an ego, he could not quench his thirst. He had to force the point, which is something that every single one of us as human beings recognize that we do. And that is also why the Fool is card 0, because the Fool was never lacking in any of these questions. He always had the answers within us, within him, as is within us. And so the final card, the World. We are now not just mechanically free people, as with the Fool. The Fool is the everyman, the Fool is the free man, the Fool is the trade person, the skilled labourer in medieval society. He is free to roam. But we also have the world at our disposal, because we are not controlled by the contracts of other people's egos. We are not controlled by the contracts of other people's wills. And that is truly the beauty of the tarot. So that's a lot. That's a lot. I know it's a lot, but we've had to get to this part of the video and I've had to explain it in that way so it gives you context, so you can understand that if you think about, if you separate the cards in this way, you know that if card 5, the Hierophant, comes up in a reading, that's about structure and dogma, that's about form, that's about choosing your path, and any of those cards 2 to 6 are about that. And you can then, through learning the other processes like numerology and everything else, ascertain exactly what that card means. So let's take, for instance, and I'm going to talk about the symbolism in a moment, and I'm also going to talk about the interesting comparison when we lay the cards out, what we actually see and who their counterparts are. So let's take card 13, let's take the Death card. And most people are really frightened of the Death card and they think, oh God, it means something bad's going to happen. Well, no, that's not true. It does not mean something bad's going to happen. What it means is that you are going to have that sinking feeling of, oh God, I need to learn this lesson. And we've all had that feeling, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's created by a catastrophe. It can be created by a need for you to shift your energy that you desire. So letting go of a relationship that you don't want, there's a sinking feeling with that, and you know, a dis-ease with that, but also a validation with that you know you've realized what needs to be done. And if we look at card 13 as a whole and say we want to read someone has card 13 in a reading and we want to read that card, if we look at it singularly without any other cards around it, what we have is we have numbers 1 and 3. Number 1 is autonomy of the self, it's ego, and it's the divine spark of energy. And number 3 is manifesting that energy. So you have manifested something, you have created a situation, but what has that situation led you to? Well, 1 plus 3 equals 4. A gridlock. So if we look at numerology, 4 grounds us. 4 is the tough lesson, it's the foundation that we have built. So if we're thinking about that in terms of the notion of death, death is not really final. It might feel final, but actually death is a foundation from which we still evolve. Death is the physical of the physicality of our soul leaving our body, and then our body has to then go into a state of decomposition in order to feed the earth, and our soul then transcends. And so it is a very weighted structure. And if you look at the visuals of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, a skeleton on a horse, well, the 4-legged beast within tarot represents stubbornness, it represents structure, it represents form and stability. So what we're seeing is that we have had to create a solid situation in order to transcend. Now, if we think about that in relation to the Hangman, we've had an ordeal, the ordeal's led to a process, and the process has led to ego death. But the ego death is just the foundation to then rebuild with temperance. So in a reading, the death card very, very rarely means anyone's going to die. It doesn't even mean anything's going to go wrong. What it means is you have to, or you have created a fixed situation which you then slowly and purposefully have to move beyond, and it is going to take more time than what you thought. So if we look at the death card in relation to astrology, for instance, what we find is that the death card is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is the Lord of Time. Saturn slows things down, and Saturn rules Capricorn, and Capricorn is about top-down structure. It's about dogma, it's about respecting tradition so that you, or understanding tradition so you can break free of tradition. So we have a card that wants to be respectful but wants to move away from what was. We want to transform into something that is. So actually, if the death card shows up in a reading, what we have is we have 3 and 1, autonomy versus manifestation, or what we've manifested has come to pass. And now it's created a fixed situation that we slowly and carefully have to respect is the case. We have to acknowledge it's happened, and now we have to move on. We don't unpick, we don't move backwards, because that is not possible. There is not the technology to bring the soul back into the body. The soul is now gone. The soul is now transcended, and it is about the acceptance of that. Now, interestingly, this card, in my opinion, is also linked to Scorpio, which represents the black point of the ocean. It is the deepest water sign, which brings the most depth. And so it's through the elevation of that energy, the understanding that not everything is fixed, that you can move forward. So hopefully just that little interpretation of the death card has helped you to understand how you don't need to feel your way through a tarot reading to get to the truth of what it's trying to tell you. The universal law is already there. The fact that a card has been picked and has come out is the message that you need. Now, when I'm tarot reading, of course I use my psychic ability, and sometimes I don't even need the cards. The cards are just there for visual aids so that my clients feel that they're getting the money's worth, basically, and they're a backup for me so that I know I'm not maybe impressing my ideas onto my clients or my personal messages onto my clients. So they're just there for my support sometimes. But when you're starting out and when you're learning the language of the tarot, these more existential ideas and these more like critical thought activating notions are super duper important, and they're just going to help you to like really grow your understanding of the tarot, not just as a divination tool, but as a tool for like spiritual attainment, spiritual enlightenment. And this is the difference between the original tarot, which started off kind of as a gambling deck, as a fortune telling deck, and it was much more light-hearted, into something that the occultists used it for, which was spiritual attainment, which was enlightenment, which was the keys to the universe. And when we get into the occult part of the course and the Kabbalistic part of the course, I'm not an expert, by the way, but I'm gonna do my best to explain the knowledge that I know about it, then you will see how deep that can really go. So for this particular part of the video, I'm going to be using the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, as I have done throughout the whole of the video. But some of these messages apply to lots of different tarot decks that aren't related to the iconography of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, because these symbols are generally universal symbols or medieval symbols which were clearly understood throughout time. So for example, white represents purity of the soul. It represents the energy of the stars. If we think about the stars twinkle, they look white or silver, and it represents the purity of our intentions. So that is a universal concept, and when we see that being represented in the tarot, for instance, with the High Priestess in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, her moon crown is white, her dress is white, and this represents her intention and her highest expression being that of purity. She bears no ill will towards the fool. She is just transcended the energy of judgment. Now, one of the interesting repetitions that I often know is the use of knees in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And if we think about what knees represented in medieval times, knees represented loyalty, because you bent your knee to the king. Like it represented devotion, humility. And interesting, knees are in astrology governed by Capricorn, which is top-down structure. So when you bend the knee, what you're doing is you're affirming that you are a willing participant in that dogma, in that top-down structure, or that you are bending the knee in the other direction and not willing to submit. So where do we see this play out? We see this play out really beautifully with the Star card. The Star card has one knee bent that her elbow is leaning on to pour the water, and the other knee is bent to the floor. So she is both kneeling and submissive to the universe and to the stars, but also upholding her own right, loyal to herself and devotional to herself. If we then look at the Hangman, we see that his knee is upside down, and his knee is folded, his leg is folded behind his thigh. Now, in astrology, the thighs are governed by Sagittarius, which is the need for freedom. So the thigh is fully exposed here. As with the Star card, the thighs are fully exposed. There's a Jupiterian energy of being able to expand and able to be optimistic and hopeful. And the knee representing loyalty and humility and submission to your seniors, to your king, to your master, is therefore subverted. This is the equivalent of a middle finger to the hierarchy by exposing his knee and forming the image in this way. Now, when we get into the occult part of the course, you'll see that some of these postures represent letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Now, this is a layered edition. As I've been saying all the way through this course, the tarot is about layers being placed upon it. There's not a truth to the tarot, there is only additions to it, because the tarot describes the journey of the soul, and the soul is never ending, and there's always more layers. So you'll see that some of these strange postures represent other things, but right now we're just talking about the basic symbolism to help you to understand that when they show up, they're showing up in a similar way, but slightly different. So, for example, we see clothed knees in the High Priestess, the Empress, the Emperor, the Hierophant, and Justice. And the clothed knee represents someone who is not subordinate. They represent someone who has loyalty and humility, but is the person in control. So when we have bare knees or exposed knees, like with the Star card, the Star is in submission, the world is in submission, but again, as the world's knee is bent, the world's knee is bent in the opposite end to the Hangman. She is now not upside down, but she is the correct way round. She has her feet pointing towards earth, and because she has her feet pointing towards earth, the energy is not subverted. So she's not saying F you to the establishment, she's saying I have built my own establishment, and anyone who doesn't like that doesn't have to be part of it. So you can see how the energy has transmuted there. And you will get this always when you see knees within the tarot. And also, say like the Devil card, when we see his knees, he is bent in almost like a yogic position, or a position that you would give birth in, that's like opening up your pelvis, but his knees are covered with hair. So this is like a really subverted, monstrous version of like being the clothed knee. So he is not in submission, he is only loyal to himself. He is not loyal to the fool. He does not feel humility or embarrassment. And this, because this card represents the mastery of will and the control of ego, you can see why this is a difficult interpretation with the use of the knee, and how it can be energetically subverted. When we look at water in the major arcana, water has and will continue to always represent purity, purification, temperance, prophecy, mysticism, devotion, love, and healing. You know, water is a cure-all, and it is such a myth in the medieval times that people were frightened of water or didn't like water or didn't get washers. That's just simply not true. Especially in England, we're an island nation, and water is always viewed with reverence and respect, and with the correct amount of fear that a discerning person would give it. For example, you're not going to go on a stormy night and jump off a cliff into the ocean, into the sea, and expect to live another day. You're going to treat the water with the respect that it deserves. And we see here in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck that we have cards with huge bodies of water, like temperance, like the star, like the moon. And when water appears in these cards, it's representing purification, it's representing resonance and frequency. So it's representing how one thing can lead to a greater change, like the butterfly effect. It's representing, as I mentioned with the star card and the moon, that ripple of water that you're pouring into a puddle becomes a sea in which change can happen. And so it, with the high priestess as well, behind her veil there is a body of water, and so she is holding the knowledge and the psychic ability and the prophecy. She is the prophetess, being able to deliver the wisdom needed for the fool to take on his journey. And if we look at the second card to the high priestess, the Empress, card 3, we see that now there is a waterfall behind her and a river flowing behind her, and that river represents the pouring of knowledge and the spiritual purification of seeking the truth. So that's when we find water showing up in the major arcana. If we think about the knees and the seated people in the major arcana, the seated people represent education and stability and a respect for our elders, for who has been before and for what they are trying to teach us. So when seated people come up in readings, especially in the major arcana like justice, what you have to think about is the structure of society. What is justice trying to tell the client or me in relation to this reading? What structure am I working with, and how can I learn from that? So sometimes, and quite often, justice shows up in readings for people who have legal matters going on, or they're in court cases, because justice does have that element of literal interpretation about it. Yeah, you have to move within alignment of society's expectations. So the Emperor represents, and if we look at the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, you know, he's holding a coin and a wand. Well, it's a scepter. So, you know, he has, and if you think about it, he could take his hat off and that could very well be a chalice. So, you know, if he wants to drink out of his hat, if he's into that kink or whatever. So you've got to take, he's got everything he needs to thrive, but he's got to take responsibility for his behavior. He has to have a solid foundation before moving forward. So the Emperor often appears in readings where someone needs that to take that responsibility, like they're starting a business and they need to delegate better, or they need to exert some sort of will or justice or responsibility. Here, how the Chariot is not seated. Notice how he is standing. So he is not looking for tradition. He is not looking to answer to established societal norms. He is on a journey on his own, and he is not trying to change your mind or trying to deliver something to you. He is in alignment with himself. He is in control. When we look at pillars in the major arcana, what we recognize, especially with the high priestess, the black and white pillar obviously represents duality. But what are pillars? Pillars are gateways. If we look at ancient architecture, Roman architecture, Egyptian architecture, Mesopotamian architecture, we see pillars everywhere, even when there isn't anything beyond the pillars. Like with the Marble Arch in London, they are essentially portals. They are gateways into a new reality. And we have duality, endurance, and stability. And we see this present in many of the major arcana cards show up in a really interesting way. So the most obvious is the high priestess, as I've mentioned, and she has Boaz and jacking, and they represent the dualities of the light and the dark, the positive and the negative, and the left and right hand path. You'll learn more about that in the esoteric part module of this course. But it's obvious that she's representing stability. Now, the Emperor in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck also has 2 pillars, but he has his hands on top of the pillars. So he is governing the duality. He is setting the precedence for what duality is. So he is the assimilated version of that, but also the structure of that. The Hierophant has the 2 pillars beside him. The pillars are the same colour. They differ slightly in the shadows in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and this is no coincidence because they're still simulating the left and right hand path, the subconscious and the conscious, the light and dark, which the High Priestess is openly expressing, whereas the Hierophant, because of the dogma and structure within his spiritual order, within his religious order, can't openly express, so has to secretly express, or express through tradition, through scripture, through dogma. And we also see, obviously, it's going to be there with Justice. We see the 2 pillars next to Justice, and these pillars are also not identical but very similar, and they're much more balanced. They have a much more balanced aspect, and they almost look like they are, one is like more forward than the other, and one is, you know, that the scales have tipped. So Justice is all about finding balance within that duality, and so Justice is always one that needs to strike balance. For me, the most interesting interpretation of the pillars comes up in the Moon card, where we have these 2 towers with tiny windows at the top, either side of the moon. Now, if we think about mythology, we have, and folklore, we have things like Rapunzel being stuck in her tower. We have Zeus raining down gold on princesses in order, who are locked in towers in order to have their babies. We see in Greek mythology Daedalus and his son stuck in a tower after helping to free the to slay the Minotaur. And so how do we escape those towers? How do we escape those pillars? And what here we have like a subversion of the structure of duality and stability and endurance. And what the moon is doing is saying you need to escape this idea of structure and duality. You need to escape this idea of the portal only being present when there is duality. What you have to now do is assimilate, and the way you assimilate is you bring that subconscious, you bring that one part of yourself forward and you assimilate. And in the moon, that's what these towers represent. It represents, or these pillars represent, it represents the assimilation of duality. So you're now at that point on your spiritual journey. So when the moon shows up in a reading, we can assert, just looking at those 2 pillars, that this is a portal. So the moon is illuminating a path. It's literally illuminating a path forward. And in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, there is a path. So whether you survive that path because you're represented by the lobster, who knows? When we look at plants in relation to the major arcana, they depict respite and reprieve. So this isn't always the case with plants and flowers when they show up in the minor arcana, and this is not specific to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, but it is relevant specifically to this deck, if you know what I mean. So generally where plants show up, they represent a period of growth and prosperity. They represent abundance and change. And I'm going to talk you through where they appear prevalently within the major arcana and what that really represents. So we're touching a little bit on the symbolism of tarot now, but when we get into the symbolism of tarot in the last module, I mean, the symbolism's so expansive that we can go over things again. And we have trees and plants showing up in the Empress, the Lovers, the Strength card, the Hangman. I'm just literally looking at the cards now. Temperance, and the Sun and the World. So if you think about all of these cards are really positive. So when you're doing a reading for somebody and the Lovers shows up, the Lovers is about making positive choices in your life. It's about making the right choice. And so you can think, well, that's a nice moment. That's a moment to pause and reflect and take positive action. And the same with the Chariot. We have slight little trees in the background with the Chariot. And then if we think about the Sun card with the crops of wheat behind the sun and the sunflowers, this is about growth and Helios, the sun god, and the light shining down on us and us reflecting the light. And it's a really positive card, and there's no ill will with the sun card. Your soul's expression is expansive, and so it's really positive will. It's the freedom of expression that feels light-hearted and a captured moment. The same with the Empress. The Empress has the trees behind her and the wheat in front of her, and it represents abundance and fertility and vitality. And she's comfortably sitting reclining on cushions. So the trees and the plants in this depiction represent the abundance of what exists already, and the comfort that everything is as it should be. In the Hangman, the plants are almost hung. They don't feel natural, even if the tree is living and the branches have been split to form this structure. It's still man-made. So the respite is something which you enforce. So in a reading, you could look at those plants and think, well, they don't look natural. They don't look like they're in a natural position. They look like they've been applied. And so we may think about this as an applied rest. This is, if you think about the spiritual ordeal of the Hangman, this is like going off to an ashram to find solitude, to find reprieve, to go through that spiritual awakening. This is not like, oops, I've just walked into having to sit down and chill out. This is enforced. Now, interestingly, what I really love about the Temperance card, and it's often something which is missed with Temperance, is the yellow irises in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck could just as easily be narcissus flowers, and narcissus flowers are more commonly known as daffodils. And in Greek mythology, Narcissus was a young man who was so consumed by how others viewed him that he ignored and was really, really horrible to a nymph who was in love with him. And as persecution for his actions, the other nymphs asked Nemesis to cause him some ill will and punish him. And so what she did was she made him fall in love with the first thing that he saw, and what he saw was his reflection. And so as he reached into the water to pick his reflection up, he was sucked into the water and he drowned. because Zeus loves a alpha toxic male, he made him a beautiful flower. And so in the Temperance card, what we have is like dipping one's toe into that story and sort of understanding that you can't get your ego from other people. You have to find that your own resilience within yourself. You can't build your self-esteem based on other people's opinion of you. And that also, if we just think about Temperance on a face value, also represents respite. Because when we say do dry, I mean, I don't drink, but like say people do dry January and they have, you know, that is Temperance, and so they are removing themselves from something which is asking for validation outside of themselves. So that's just a little interesting insert into why the use of plants in Temperance is so interesting in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And of course we have the wreath with the World card, and the wreath, this is the only time the wreath shows up in the major arcana in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, at least. And the wreath represents everlasting bond, but also like energy that you've put into it. It's not just a formed circle. It's something which you've worked on, which you have plotted, which you've created, which you've added to, which you've constructed, and that is an unbreakable commitment to yourself. And so again, that's respite, because that represents the completion and the manifested reality of the journey. So I hope that you have enjoyed the foray into the major arcana. I've really enjoyed expressing my knowledge on it, and I hope it's not too esoteric for you and you're able to pick up some of the nuances that I'm describing. The tarot is complex and you can go at your own pace. So even though I'm an expert, I'm still learning, and there is a lot of stuff that's still over my head. And don't feel overwhelmed by the information that I'm giving you. Just take what's resonating for now, and you can keep your hold of your notes and go back over it and keep relearning as you grow as a reader, or whatever it is you want to do with the tarot, whether you want to use it for spiritual development or to just understand archetypes or to write a book or whatever it is you're doing. Just take what you need from this video, as with all spiritual practices. Just take what you need and then revisit when it feels correct to do so. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for getting to the end of the video. I really appreciate all of my students who are on this course and anyone who's watching this video after I've released it. Please carry on the conversation below if you want to, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.